Hello, welcome to Bold and Blunt, and I'm your host, Cheryl Richard, giving you a Christian conservative view of today's news, politics, culture, and events. And today's topic of discussion, the coronavirus vaccine and where it's going to lead in this country. Supposedly, in this country, land of the free, can you say, vaccine passport. But before we get into that, a quick heads up of a special deal the Washington Times is offering, particularly for Bold and Blunt listeners. Go to washingtontimes.com/Cheryl, and that's Cheryl, Cheryl. Type in some info, and you can have a 50% discount deal off a year's access of the digital edition of the Washington Times. 50% off, just in time for spring. What a great Easter gift, right? Anyhow, it's all that the Washington Times has to offer. That's great news, that's great commentaries, and that's great podcasts like Bold and Blunt. 50% off. The deal is not going to last forever. Check it out. And while you're on the website, why not subscribe to my newsletter that comes out 3 times a week, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, delivered right to your email box at 11:15 in the morning, Eastern Time. 3 times a week, you'll get all my weekly commentaries, all my daily commentaries, along with the direct link to my twice-weekly Bold and Blunt podcasts. My recent guests have included K.T. McFarland, Steve Bannon, Charlie Kirk, and more. You don't want to miss the great discussions we have. The Dukes of Hazzard guy, John Schneider, the Papa John's pizza guy, John Schnatter. Cover a lot of different issues here on Bold and Blunt, from contact tracing to the greatness of America being based on the whole idea that our rights come from God, not government. This is a podcast that you just don't want to miss. And so sign up for it. Get it delivered as well as my commentaries straight to your email box 3 times a week. Anyhow, so today's discussion, vaccine passports. Back in February, I wrote, as a commentary for the Washington Times, the vaccine passport, it's here, it's now, it's real, and it's outrageously unconstitutional. Where's the "it's my body, I can do what I want" abortion crowd now? Often running to get their own coronavirus vaccination, no doubt, and that's fine. Free choice is free choice, and those who want to vaccinate should, by all means, go ahead and vaccinate. But to impose a vaccine as a condition of traveling, to set in place a "show me the papers, comrade" type of system, is to suggest that government knows best what is best for an individual's health, and therefore has the right to strip that individual of the power to self-determine. That's not constitutional. That's dictatorial. So that's what I wrote back in February. And here we are. Here we are, President Joe Biden throwing out the greatness of the vaccine passports. Great Republican lawmakers are slamming the idea. At least they're putting up a fight. But what we need are more Republican leaders like Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, who says he will outright ban coronavirus vaccines in his state of Florida. You know what? Governor Ron DeSantis has emerged, along with Governor Kristi Noem of South Dakota, as the pure hero in this whole coronavirus madness that's called government response to COVID-19. And I predict in the next couple years, Florida is going to be overrun with American citizens rushing to move there. Because American citizens, by and large, don't like being told what to do. That's the basic American spirit. Don't tell us what to do, government. We know better than you. Or how about this? Don't tell us what to do, government. You work for me. And that includes the highest offices in the land. The President of the United States works for that guy that picks up your garbage twice a week in your local community. That's what America is based upon. That's what makes America great. The idea that individual rights take priority over the state. We're not a collective here. We're not China. We're not all alive simply to serve the interests of the states. We're alive because God graced us with the gift and blessing of life. And as part of that grace, He instilled in us certain seeds and talents and motivations and inspirations. And He expected us to exploit those seeds of talents and motivations and interests while we're here on earth for His glory, not for the state's glory, not for the government's glory. Founding fathers would be outraged at the idea of a White House administration suggesting the idea of a vaccine passport. Show me the papers so that you can travel freely, so that you can enter a business, so that you can attend a ball game, so that you can go to school, so that you can drive down the road and pass from one state's boundaries to another, so that you could fly an airplane. And yes, I know founding fathers did not speak specifically of air travel. But the spirit of America has not changed since the founding fathers encapsulated it in that great document called the Declaration of Independence, where we are as individuals endowed by our Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, pursuit of happiness. And I, for one, am having my life and liberty and pursuit of happiness infringed upon by an overburdensome government that is steadily walking toward a demand that I show papers in order to travel freely in my own community or in any other community of the United States for that matter.
And tonight, we are getting a glimpse at how our post-pandemic world could operate. New York rolling out a new app some people call a COVID passport, a one-stop shop that stores your tests and vaccine status and notifies businesses and venues. Madison Square Garden will be one of the first places to use it. News 4's Adam Harding is there live now. And Adam, how does it work?
Yes, Adam, tell us how it works. Because we're too stupid, apparently, to realize that the way it works is to give government the control to surveil us wherever we go. Of course, they don't put it that way. The government does not put a vaccine passport or a smart app that tracks you and alerts businesses to your health status and gives a green light to your health being good enough to enter said business. The government doesn't paint it as a surveillance and tracking system. That would be too honest. That would be too alarming. And American citizens might rebel against such a government overreach. So let's hear how the government actually describes a vaccine passport or a smart app that does, in essence, what a vaccine passport is supposed to do.
Well, Gilba, we know testing is so important to making sure that venues like Madison Square Garden behind us can open up safely. The city and state now promoting this new app that they hope will serve as essentially a COVID passport. Like when you go to the airport, you've got all of your documents in one place. Everyone we spoke with, some of them say this could be a potential game changer.
Yes, a game changer, meaning that the new normalcy that we've all craved to return to is here and now in the form of a government surveillance and tracking system. You just carry your smartphone with you wherever you go. And for those who don't have a smartphone, don't worry, because new technology, new developments are coming where you won't even have to have a smartphone. You won't even have to have an app downloaded in order to get government's permission to go into a certain building in order to travel. You'll be able to wave your hand. There'll be a chip that contains all your information, all the pertinent information. And look, this is how the government sells it. I don't know if you heard Adam. And by the way, that was from NBC New York Channel 4. But Adam basically laid out what the government logic is. It's for the health and safety. It's for the health and safety of the nation. It's for the health and safety of your neighbor. It's for the health and safety of you that you allow the government to surveil and track you. And here's the real abhorrent part. The government doesn't even have the courage to try and pass a surveillance and tracking program through the open, transparent legislative process. The government doesn't even have the right to get the representatives and senators on record, voting yay or nay for such an abhorrent anti-American system. So what they do is they float the idea of a return to normalcy, depending upon a system that allows the gate guards of the public sectors of society to determine whether or not you've had a vaccine, whether or not you've done the responsible thing to protect yourself and others in the nation. They float the idea that this is what is needed to return to normalcy. But instead of taking a vote, instead of pushing it through legislation and putting it to the smell test of the courts where it would quickly crumble, they float the idea and then they stand back and let the private sector become the enforcers of society. They let the private sector tell American citizens, American consumers, what they need to do in order to enter their private sector arenas and businesses and facilities and structures. So in New York, as you just heard, Madison Garden is requiring those who want to attend games to prove that they have that green light, that check mark from the health bureaucrats that work for the government, that you've taken the shot, that you're not a harm to others, that you're not sick. And then, if you can prove that, you show your smartphone, you show your app, you show your green light, your check mark, then you get to have a seat inside Madison Garden. And if you can't, sorry, you can't come in. Wait for it. This is how the private industry is going to go. Because government is not just overburdensome and intrusive, it's cowardly. So government is not going to pass a law. Joe Biden is not going to sign an executive order that tries to mandate a vaccine as a condition of doing certain free market type activities in America. Now, Biden will sign executive orders about vaccine passports, but they will be presented more in terms of advisements and recommendations. And he will sign executive orders on vaccine passports that cover the areas within the federal government's jurisdiction. Perhaps in order to enter the White House or Congress or federal properties, you have to show a vaccine passport. But he can't do that on the private sector. So what he's going to do is he's going to sic the health bureaucrats of the federal, state, and local governments on private businesses to compel these private businesses to put up signs in their windows saying, along with no mask, no service, no vaccine, no entry. And so we're going to slowly see the private sector turn into the enforcement arm for the pro-vaccination world, for the government. We've seen it with the face masks. And, alarmingly, we've seen so many American citizens comply, even when it's beyond stupid to comply. And people at this point in time, private businesses at this point in time, are so hungry for a return to some sort of pre-coronavirus days where freedom was unquestionable, that they're going to comply. They're going to allow the goalpost to be moved. Look, if you don't want this to get worse, you're going to have to take individual steps right now to resist. Civil disobedience right now is the only way to stop this tide. Yes, I know everybody in America wants a return to normalcy. I know private businesses are suffering, unless you're Walmarts and Targets and marijuana shops and liquor stores, because the government has put the big boot down and prevented you from operating as normal. But if American citizens don't right now, right at this moment in time, resist the idea of having to show a vaccine document or check mark on an app or any other type of proof of vaccine as a condition of entry, as a condition of travel, if we all don't resist right now, the floodgate will open, and government in the next year or two under this administration will have unchecked powers to regulate, control, surveil, track, and force American citizens to behave and to accept things that never before would have been imagined, not just by the Founding Fathers, but even by a decade ago of Americans. Mark these words. The vaccine passport, along with the contact tracing, which I did a show about a few months ago. If you didn't hear it, you need to go back and find my Bold and Blunt show on contact tracing. Those two processes, those two systems, those two horrendous, egregious, anti-American campaigns, whatever you want to call them, it's going to strip individuals of all semblance of God-given rights. And once that happens, that genie's not going back in the bottle. Mark these words. Mark them right now. Resist the vaccine passport. Boycott businesses that try and mandate proof of vaccine as a condition of entry. Go to school board meetings and demand that the school board do away with any type of proof of coronavirus vaccine as a condition of allowing a child back in school. Fight the college campuses around the nation, like James Madison University in Virginia, that try and mandate a smart app on the phone of your child, of your student, so that they can track you and alert the big government people on campus that when you come in contact too close to somebody who is tested positive for the coronavirus, so then they can swoop in and automatically isolate you for 2 weeks in some room on campus set aside specifically to isolate students. You have to resist this stuff now. If you're thinking, like so many overly optimistic Americans, that this is all about the coronavirus, this is all about keeping American citizens safe and healthy and secure and not spreading the virus, boy, you are missing the picture. That was so 2020, maybe February, March 2020. Everything that came after is suspect. Everything that came after is government's way of exerting controls that they don't rightly have the authority to exert, not in America. If you want America, if you want American liberties, civil disobedience on certain things that are coming down the pike right now is the only way. Yes, it's uncomfortable, but too freaking bad. If it's too much to ask that you refuse to take a vaccine for the sake of entering Madison Square Garden, and that's your sole reason for taking that vaccine, then what kind of American are you? Really? What kind of American are you if you just go along to get along? My guest today, Dr. Kathy Cook. She's going to help sift through some of the discussions that have been held in the media on the COVID vaccine. Maybe you're a parent right now and you're wondering, should my kid get this vaccine? So I have my own thoughts on it, but let's hear what a real doctor has to say about it. And Kathy Cook, she is a faculty member at Summit Ministries and founder of Celebrate Kids, which is a nonprofit that helps parents ensure their kids flourish now and in the future. She earned a PhD in reading and in educational psychology from Purdue University, and she's also an author of 6 books. And today, Kathy Cook, she is going to help explain the pros and cons of the coronavirus vaccine for your kids. Kathy, thank you so much for being on Bold and Blunt. I appreciate your time.
I'm happy to be here. I appreciate what you do for your listeners.
Oh, thank you. So let's start by talking about the coronavirus impact on kids. How negative has coronavirus been on kids and not simply the virus?
Right, the entire experience, right? The virus,
Mm-hmm.
the masking, the stay at home, the lack of school and sports and musical concerts, it's all a mess, and it certainly has affected many of them. There's data to suggest that, which is alarming. And yet I want to say that a lot of our children are very resilient, and they're being raised by amazing parents, and they're hanging out with really solid adults who are able to help them walk through this valley without horrendous effects. So I think it varies by city to city, state to state, family to family. It's not a good situation, that's for sure.
What are the recent stats on suicides and depression and addictions among the youth?
Right, that data is up for sure. Self-harm has increased greatly, I think partly because they have access to the things that they can harm themselves with, versus maybe alcohol and illegal drugs that are certainly harder to get to if you're in a lockdown, stay-at-home situation still in some of our communities, or being watched more by the adults that you're hanging out with, certainly. So, yeah, statistics are horrendous. In the Northeast, there's some data that says it's up 333% since a year ago. So, obviously,
Wow.
that's something to be really concerned about. And yet, what a lot of people don't understand in the headline is that still most of our children are not doing it. So that's a really comforting statement for me. But it is bad. Suicide is terrible. I know of some communities that have lost no adolescents or young adults to the virus, that have lost more than ever before to suicide. Depression concerns me, of course, because it can cause academic apathy. It can cause them to disconnect from the adults who love them. And it can cause them to not have a good perspective about their future, which then changes, again, the way that they look at their entire lives, which is definitely something to be really concerned about.
I know you said a minute ago, and you expressed optimism that some parents and caretakers are doing this right. They're really helping the kids. But if you look at it from a societal point of view, a society is only as good as its weakest link. It's only as good as how it treats its most vulnerable. And look at what we're doing to the kids. What would you recommend that America do right now to help youth navigate coronavirus?
One thing I want to say is that adults need to make sure that they do have their acts together. The intentional self-harm and depression and anxiety among adults is at an all-time high.
Right.
And so the adults are then, of course, going to pass that on to the children who they're raising, maybe their grandkids who they can't see, and they're complaining all the time and talking all the time. So what I say to adults is control what you can control, which is your speech and your attitude and your own health, hopefully, and don't try to get into the business of the things that you don't have power over. So I think that's one thing adults can do for children, is be careful of what they say in front of them and make sure that they're speaking life into the young people. I think that's important. I think being available for the conversation, putting our phones down and walking toward young people and saying, hey, you appear to be off. Let's talk. Because, if you say to a child, are you depressed? You say to even a young adult, are you depressed? They don't know for sure if they are. They don't know what depression feels like. And then you're even stressing them out more because they think they should have an answer. What I think we can do instead is say, hey, you appear more self-critical than normal. Or, normally you come down and hang out with me when we're preparing dinner, and the last couple of nights you've chosen to, stay in your room. That's not like you. What's up with that? So talk about the observable. Talk about the things we have evidence for, and be available to those hard conversations. Help them process what they're feeling.
Does the data suggest that schools should be open or closed right now?
I believe most of the data would suggest that we should be open.
Okay. And when you say open, do you mean open with restrictions or open? How do you characterize that?
That's a fair question, and I'm not an expert at this, and I don't live in every state. I don't pretend to understand what it's like everywhere. I think, though, the data is pretty clear that children don't transmit the virus often, and they need an education, and they need socialization, and they need to discover their skill set. and they need to discover their passions. And they often do that in the educational system. And so my fear is that if we don't open and give them an opportunity to go back to what used to be, they're going to have a negative future potentially. I'm really concerned about our teachers, and I think preparing our teachers for that in-person, full-on teaching of kids who are going to come in depressed and anxious and confused about their future, and concentration levels are down. There's data that suggests that ADHD and ADD and the other dangerous Ds are up. So our teachers are going to have their hands full, and I'm not sure that we're thinking about how to prepare them. That concerns me.
I know you said that kids are resilient, and I agree with you completely on that. But there are certain segments of youth in America's society that already were vulnerable. And now, a year out of school, I drive to work through D.C., and I see kids hanging out on the street corners who should rightly be in school. What about them? Where is this going to take them, even when schools reopen?
Right, totally agree with you. If we don't have our act together for the disenfranchised kids from single parents, different economic standings, different races, it's going to be a problem. Schools in the, if you will, the inner city versus the suburbs. We've always had inappropriate differences among those, and it's only going to be amplified, the lack of high-speed internet, all those kinds of things. So again, are we as a community going to step up? Are we going to invest money for remedial education and for after-school activities? Are the churches going to step up? Are foundations going to even, assess where they're spending their money and maybe giving grants to people they haven't given money to before? Because this is going to be a major effort for us to be back to the old way, if I can put it that way. It's possible because I think we are resilient people, and yet it's going to be a challenge.
It's definitely going to be a challenge. I think that's a little bit understated. I think it's going to be a societal devastation if we don't get kids back to school. Because we're not talking about just educating kids. We're talking about educating our next generation of leaders.
Exactly. The workforce, the leaders, you're exactly right. And so, again, I'm back to the remedial education that I think will be necessary because children, there's no way they're learning as much as they could have learned in a classroom with their peer group where they hear other kids talking about ideas and then that informs them of their ideas. I can't imagine, young children learning how to read, looking at a screen and not having a lot of face-to-face enjoyable opportunities to gain ground and to learn. It is going to be a challenge. I agree with you. And again, we need to step up. It's not just medical, right? A lot of people are talking about the medical implications that are huge. There's the social, emotional, spiritual implications. Are we going to bounce back? And are we going to be there for the children? Are we going to support the teachers? Are we going to support the system?
Let's talk about the vaccine passport, mandates to get the vaccine, perhaps to return to school. Where do you stand on that? What's your view of all those issues?
Right. I'm an advocate for parents. I think that's a parent's decision. I will not be supportive of mandates of very much of anything, quite frankly. I think parents need to have that authority over their children. I'm not an expert at this. I know the data is still up for debate, pretty concerning. Again, the survival rate right now is better than the vaccine is able to combat the virus. So I'm not a fan, and I don't say that lightly. I think, again, it's an individual decision. But who's making those decisions, right? Are the people making those decisions for our children and even for our school systems ones who are qualified to do so? What kind of data are they looking at? Who are they talking to? I am concerned about that. I think it's one of my fears would be that it's a false impression that I'm safe. And that may not be the case, and maybe it will even get worse. It's a mess. It's just a mess.
Here's the thing that drives me nuts about the statements that have come out from both the government and the health world, as well as through the media, that the vaccine for the coronavirus is 100% safe. It's 100% safe. You can trust it completely. And yet it's only been out for a short time. So there's no way in common sense world to guarantee anything long term dealing with the safety of this shot.
Exactly. I totally agree with you. No one's had it long enough to know for sure. What if a year or two it's, activated, something in your system? What if it is proven to be an activator of, rheumatoid arthritis or something worse? It's not. This is no joke. We're experimenting with human life. It's not wise. I get it, and yet I don't want to believe that as many people are buying the lie. I guess I'll be bold enough to say that.
That is bold. And that is exactly, though, the truth, buying the lie of what the government's putting forward about the safety of this shot. And especially in kids. Kids don't get sick from the coronavirus by and large, correct?
That is correct. And that's one of the reasons that I think we put them back in school. Even if they have to get a lot of substitute teachers because the adults are transmitting, that's still going to be better than at home in front of a screen where mom and dad are also at work on a screen, distracted, or trying to go to work and can't leave their kids at home. And no, it's such, we're meant to learn, all of us learn in a social setting. Even adults learn best in social settings where we can persuade and debate and discover truth from other people. You learn better in that environment. It's a very serious thing. It's a very serious thing. Yeah.
Where do you see this whole vaccine passport argument headed in America? Where do you see it landing?
Wow. I hope it doesn't land at all, to be honest with you. I hope it goes away. Maybe I'm being really naive. I hope there's enough of us that stand up and say, no, we're not going to play that game. We're not going to be mandated to do something that's an individual choice. I'm a Constitution person. I believe in the Constitution. I believe in the individual's right. And I understand that we live in community. I understand that we care about fellow man. I get that. I do care. And yet I am responsible for my body. And man, I just hope that we're not required. I fly a lot for what I do. I'm a public speaker by profession. I'm on airplanes now that we've opened up much of America, really almost every week. And you fly with common sense, and we take care of ourselves, and we're wise. So I hope it goes away.
And the mask mandates or the mask recommendations, they get put in place by private sector as mandates. Will that go away, you think?
I hope so. I believe more and more people are more and more angry. I think we're very tired of it, and I think a lot of us have read that the masks don't necessarily work. You can look at states that have had, freedom and states that haven't, and isn't it interesting that some of the states with greater freedom have less of the virus? It's very confusing. I don't envy decision makers, but when I travel and visit with people, there's an undercurrent of anger and disappointment in our officials and in the leaders, and I think we're going to rise up. I think there's going to be people who rise up and say we're done with this.
I think
it's
you're
awkward.
right.
I hope there's not even a minor civil war, and that's a horrible phrase for me to even use. But I do feel that there's that undercurrent out there.
Civil war, no, but civil disobedience, that is exactly what we need at this time, at this point in time. And you know what? Thank you, Kathy Cook, for injecting some much-needed common sense and, just cooler debate into this matter. I appreciate your time.
Well, I appreciate you having me on the show. Thanks for what you do.
God bless. More civil disobedience, that is what it's going to take. Jeez, how many more losses of individual freedoms? How many more government mandates? How many more government overreaches? How many more government runarounds of constitutionally guaranteed freedoms to force private sector to become the enforcement arms for the government? How many more instances of this do we need before we as a nation rise up and say, enough, no more? It's time for a return to God-given individual rights. Thanks for listening. Tune in next time. And in the meanwhile, stay blunt, stay bold.